Love Diary of a Schoolgirl, Daughter of the Soviet Union. By Ella Rom. Chapter 1, A Soviet Cradle. Born Behind the Curtain, 1966. I was born on December 29, 1966, but from the very first days of my life, confusion began because my parents came up with another date of birth for me, January 1, 1967. It was recorded on the birth certificate. They want to make me a year younger. Anyway, I was supposed to be born at the beginning of January, but my mother fell on an icy street, and delivery began a few days earlier. The year of my birth was not much different from the years before. Writers Yuli Daniel and Andrei Sinyavsky were sentenced to 5 and 7 years in prison for publishing anti-Soviet literature abroad. This trial became a symbol of Soviet censorship and intellectual suppression. Leonid Brezhnev consolidated power, becoming the General Secretary and de facto leader of the USSR. And Anna Akhmatova, one of Russia's most revered poets, passed away, symbolizing the end of an era in literature. I was born in a small mining town, Shalakovsky, classified as an urban-type settlement, in the Rostov-on-Don region of the former USSR. My mother was one of the most beautiful women in town. She resembled Marilyn Monroe, a blonde with exquisite features and a striking figure. She was young, Russian, and a nurse. My father was 5 years older. He was Jewish and a doctor. What could possibly bring these two together? They were both running from their troubles. My mother had fled Shalakovsky, deeply wounded by the man she once loved. Her path led her to Moldova, where she completed nursing school. After graduation, she was assigned to work at the hospital where my father practiced. He, too, was running. A woman had died under his care from undiagnosed typhus, and a government committee informed him that continuing his work in Moldova would be nearly impossible after the incident. When he first saw my mother, he fell instantly in love with her. She kept her distance, but he was determined to pursue her. He abandoned everything, his city, his aging parents, his wife and son, and followed her back to Shalakovsky. The town was named after the geologist Shalakov, who found coal in this area of the Don region. From the hospital where I was born, I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on Gorky Street, which was very cold at the time. We experienced blackouts and were without hot water and natural gas. My mother returned to her job as a pediatric nurse when I was 3 months old, as that was the length of her maternity leave. As a nursing mother, she was allowed to go home for a lunch break to feed me since the hospital was a 10-minute walk away. For half a year, my father's presence in my life was limited. He was away, deep in neurology coursework that his career demanded. Our time together was reduced to brief weekend visits. My early childhood comes to mind in blurred fragments. I remember a giant walking doll, almost my height, and I was afraid of her. Another memory is of Grandpa Frost, the Russian Santa Claus, forcing me to read poetry at the kindergarten's New Year party. I also recall a dog that escaped from a traveling circus and stayed with us for several days before disappearing again. When I was 1 year and several months old, my parents moved to an apartment on Chekhov Street. It was 1968, a leap year. Our 3-bedroom apartment had a large hallway and a big balcony, which was eventually glazed to make a summer room. We lived on the top floor of a 2-story building. In addition to our street, other streets in the area were named after Russian writers, including Pushkin, Gorky, and Mayakovsky, among others. I remember the neighbors well. Under us lived my best school friend, Luda, the most beautiful girl in our class. Her father, the principal of one of the schools, died of cancer, and Luda and her mother died tragically a few years later. An older man named Baron lived with his wife, Baba Shura, and her sister, Baba Luba, in the other apartment. Baba Shura was dark-haired and dark-skinned, and Baba Luba, on the contrary, had a very light appearance. First, Grandfather Baron died. I was terrified of the coffin lid, which was placed in front of the entrance door. Baba Luba went after him, and Baba Shura lived alone for a long time in an empty apartment. Next to her lived the family of Edek, who, to the envy of all the neighbors, had a motorcycle with a sidecar. His wife, whom everyone called Edek's Mashka, had a disabled daughter, Vera. She seems to have suffered from polio, which left her paralyzed. She managed to move somehow, leaning on a stick and shuffling heavily with her feet, which did not obey her very much. When I was a child, she looked like an evil sorceress, and I tried to slip by quickly when we met in the corridor. Aunt Natasha and her husband lived upstairs. They liked to drink. And next to them was Baba Balusika. Her daughter had schizophrenia. An electricity station was located opposite our building. Its web of wires stretched in different directions. Periodically, something flashed at this station, and the lights in the houses surrounding it went out. My dad dialed the station immediately. "Station?" Vaisman speaking. It seemed this was the end of the conversation, and a drunk electrician answered that the light would soon be restored. Once, I decided to find famous people by Vaisman's last name. As a child, I could not even imagine how many people named Vaisman lived around. My only namesake, excluding relatives. In those years was a movie lighting assistant whose surname occasionally appeared on the screen at the end of the films. Digging around on the internet, I found some famous carriers of this surname. They turned out to be American writer Benjamin Vaisman, Mr. Deadman, Austrian philosopher Friedrich Vaisman, analytical philosophy, German composer Julius Vaisman, famous Russian cinema actor Anatoly Belyaev, whose real name is also Vaisman, American movie director Len Vaisman, Die Hard, Another World/Underworld, Jewish writer Baruch Mordecai Vaisman, and even Russian revolutionary Grigory Vaisman. There is also a comet named after astronomers who discovered it, Comet Vaisman-Skif. However, the most exciting owner of the Vaisman surname was Benjamin Vaisman, a famous fraudster of the early 20th century. But back to our town. Thanks to the 3 mines and a processing plant, the Shalakovsky town was formed in 1953. Between July 1957 and September 1960, 220 envoys from the People's Republic of Bulgaria were involved in the construction of the town. Some of them returned home with Russian wives. In 1960, on the birthday of Georgy Dimitrov, a bust of the founder of the Bulgarian Communist Party was erected in the center of the town. The monument gazed toward the twin symbols of Soviet life, the Palace of Culture ahead, and behind it, the Palace of Pioneers. Between the palaces was the so-called center, grocery, deli, bread, dairy, and bookstores. To buy bread, I had to walk through the trash heap and past the public wooden toilets, with a pinched nose due to the terrible smell. We carried buckets of garbage to the trash heap, where women workers, wielding giant shovels, transferred the waste into the garbage truck. I also had to pass a row of half-collapsed wooden sheds, and I always felt uneasy when I saw men there. Another famous monument in the town was a statue of Lenin, known as Lenin with a star. At the feet of the monument, a red star was located, under which the appeal of the 1968 Komsomol members to the 2018 Komsomol members was buried. I heard that the star was opened at the appointed time. However, I needed to find out what the Komsomol members were saying. One more structure, which I cannot fail to mention, was the fountain in the park, where my younger sister, Zhanna, once fell in the winter. It was frozen water in it, and she decided to test the strength of the ice. Now, a church has been erected in place of this fountain. When I was young, the town had about 15,000 people. Since we departed for America in 1993, the town has experienced ups and downs, which I can only judge from online photographs, as I never returned there. However, I know my poetry books are in the local library. I spent my childhood on Chekhov Street. I lived there from 1968 to October 1984, when I left for Saratov and was admitted to the Saratov Medical School. In front of our building, where neighbors were playing lotto at the table, children's activities were in full swing. With the girls, we played with paper dolls that we had drawn ourselves, exchanged candy wrappers, and postcards. Later, we collected wrappers from colorful imported soaps and toothpastes. Often, we gave performances that surprised the entire neighborhood. At the head of our horde of boys and girls was Natasha from an apartment on the first floor. Her parents were alcoholics, and Natasha was most often left to herself. She taught me how to eat bread with butter and sugar. Natasha sang sad love songs and always smiled. Once, we decided to stage the fairy tale Pinocchio. I was assigned the honorary role of the tortoise tortilla. I loved it when my father took the whole kids' company to the food store. We bought candies or buns and occupied the benches outside the store to indulge in a gastronomic pleasure. Once, my uncle Fima, who lived in Kishinev, bought and sent my parents a living room furniture set. The furniture arrived in huge cardboard boxes, which, after being removed, proved to be useless to anyone. Without thinking twice, a small construction team of children built something like Uncle Tom's hut. In general, I had a magical childhood, one that was incredibly magical. I remember a vast, wild field of spring tulips. They had such magnificent colors. Probably, they are perceived as such only in childhood. We brought home as much as we could carry. It was also the unprotected corn fields, where we stole corn in buckets, and my grandmother cooked it in a large enamel pot. Or incredibly deep snow that once fell. Adults made paths that connected houses, shops, and schools. Only my head was sticking out of the snow, and my town for a while turned into the possession of the Snow Queen. There were, of course, troubles. A torn dress caught on the fence when I leaped off it, bleeding after one of the boys threw a stone at me. I almost broke my nose on the edge of a dressing table with a mirror when I played with a hula hoop in front of it. The blood that flowed, as it seemed to me then like a river, drove me into absolute panic, and my parents, who came running to my heartbreaking screams, almost fainted. They had to call an ambulance, and the wound was safely stitched up, but the scar, the memory of a happy childhood, flaunts my nose to this day. The culprit of another bloody trouble was my dad, who pinched my finger on the door to the bathroom. Good that it was not my nose, which I poked, where it was and was not necessary. I had no luck with electricity either. Twice I stuck my fingers in the socket by mistake, and once I was even sucked into the broken refrigerator when my grandmother was washing the floors. So I stood under the current until my grandmother, who was practically blind, accidentally stumbled upon what had happened. I don't recall the last incident, but I do remember that I wanted to be an electrician from a young age. There was no water or gas at home when I was little. Well, there was water, of course, but only sometimes. Due to the low water pressure, it hardly rose to our second floor. Often, we had to wait in a long line to fill our baskets with water from the pump outside. There were many houses, but only one pump was available. To be honest, we rarely stood in line, since my father, the head of the neurology department in the town, was usually given priority out of respect. We bathed once a week, again due to the lack of water. We heated water there in a big electric boiler named Titan, which had barely enough water for a family of 4. We had to conserve water, so while lathering our bodies with soap, we turned the water off. The Titan was mounted right on the corner of the bathtub. I was terrified of it. Our physics lessons had drilled into me that water and electricity don't mix. I couldn't shake the feeling that this damn Titan might explode at any moment. We cooked food on a stove made of bricks and cement. There were 2 large holes in the stove for adding coal. Above the stove was a water tank that fed the kitchen faucet. Since there were no circuit breakers, it was necessary to ensure that water did not overflow the edge of the tank. Otherwise, excess water began to pour onto the hot stove, which was used to heat the apartment because the central heating system was not providing sufficient heat. Hissing hot water flew in all directions, and steam filled the kitchen with a white suspension. My grandmother, who lived in the so-called Finnish house, a house that was brought disassembled and assembled at the construction site, had neither a water tank nor taps. Instead, she had a washstand and iron vessel similar to March's mug, an old-time enema device. Grandma also had a summer shower outside the house, where rainwater was collected and heated by the sun. There, my grandmother washed in the warm season. The town also had a bathhouse with a shower and a bathtub. Additionally, it had a public area, the cheapest room. My mother brought me to the bathhouse if there was no water at home. One time, I was in the shared room. I looked at the naked woman with curiosity and could not figure out what to do with the basin that was given to me at the entrance. We were supposed to fill the basin with water and splash it on ourselves. In early childhood, my parents washed me in an iron bathtub clogged with a cork wrapped in gauze. Sometimes, the cork would slide out, and the water would spill, quickly seeping into the homes of the neighbors below. Neighbors drummed on the radiators, metal tubes filled with hot water for heating the rooms, and we rushed to dry the floor with towels. As I grew older, my mother bathed me in the basin, using water heated on our stove. To make our life better, my father bought an electric water heater for the kitchen. I liked to brush my teeth with warm water, especially in winter, which was cold. We did our laundry in the washing machine, which made distressing sounds during the cycle. Sometimes, the hose would disconnect, and the neighbors would begin violently knocking on the radiators again.